Episode 5. Carlo Gambino, the quiet Don who ruled New York. The seed of power. They called him the Quiet Don. No flashy suits, no loud threats, no headlines. While others craved the spotlight, he built an empire in the shadows. He controlled New York with a whisper, and when he finally took the throne, not a single bullet was fired. This is the story of Carlo Gambino, the man who ruled the mafia without raising his voice. Welcome to Criminal Code, Episode 5. A silent climb. Gambino didn't rise through bloodshed, he rose through discipline. While other young men chased turf wars and made noise, Carlo moved under the radar. He didn't drink, didn't party, and never showed off. He listened more than he spoke. By the early 1940s, Gambino had earned respect. He became a caporegime, a captain, trusted by the Mangano family to handle operations quietly and efficiently. He built his network like a spider spins a web, slow, strong, and invisible. He developed ties with other bosses, especially Tommy Lucchese, another low-key powerhouse who controlled the Lucchese crime family. Together, they played a long game, not to rule the streets, but to rule the commission. The Anastasia problem. By the 1950s, Gambino's boss was no longer Vincent Mangano. He had mysteriously disappeared. His replacement, Albert Anastasia, ruled with an iron fist and a short fuse. He was unpredictable, violent, and loud, everything Carlo was not. Anastasia's obsession with power and brutality put him on the radar. He had enemies on every side, and Gambino saw the writing on the wall. Along with Lucchese and the backing of Vito Genovese, Carlo helped orchestrate the Anastasia hit. It happened in a barbershop. Anastasia was shot in the chair, caught off guard while looking in the mirror. With Anastasia gone, Carlo Gambino became boss of the family. No shootouts, no wars, just silence and strategy. The empire grows. As boss, Gambino kept the family name, but changed everything else. No more unnecessary violence, no public attention. He made the Gambino family the most profitable of all five, with hands in construction, gambling, loan sharking, hijacking, and labor unions. Carlo avoided wiretaps, grandstanding, and messy business. His men respected him not out of fear, but because he always protected the family. He once said, "We don't need guns, we got brains." By the mid-1960s, the Gambino crime family was the most powerful mafia family in America, all without a single newspaper headline screaming his name. Behind the throne, Gambino understood something others didn't. Power isn't about attention, it's about control. He quietly placed politicians, judges, and law enforcement in his pocket. He had eyes everywhere and lips sealed shut. He was also a master of appearances. To outsiders, Carlo was just a quiet old man with a bad back. He walked slowly, wore cheap suits, and lived in a modest house in Brooklyn. But behind closed doors, he was making million-dollar decisions, approving hits, and keeping the American mafia one step ahead of the law. Bloodline and betrayal. As he aged, Gambino started planning for the future. He didn't want another violent transition like the Anastasia hit. So he handpicked his successor, Paul Castellano, his brother-in-law. Castellano was more of a businessman than a street boss, just like Carlo wanted. But not everyone agreed with it. By the early 1970s, Carlo Gambino's grip on the underworld was unmatched. He'd quietly turned the Gambino family into the most powerful of New York's five families, all without bloodbaths or media frenzy. His name rarely made headlines, yet every major decision in the city's criminal underground ran through him. Politicians, businessmen, even law enforcement, some were bought, some intimidated, and many simply knew not to ask questions. Gambino's secret weapon wasn't just strategy, it was trust. He surrounded himself with men who valued loyalty above ambition. One of those men was Agnello Neil Della Croce, a tough and respected figure from the old school. Neil wasn't flashy, but he was feared, and Carlo trusted him to keep order, especially with the more violent crews. Together, they kept things steady for a while. But nothing lasts forever. As Gambino aged, cracks began to form. The younger generation was restless. They wanted quicker money, bigger scores, and less patience. One name started circling the streets: John Gotti. Flashy, fearless, and dangerously ambitious, he admired Gambino, but didn't always follow the rules. Neil Della Croce would become the buffer between Gotti's rising crew and Carlo's quiet empire. Embarked in 1976, Carlo Gambino's health took a turn. The underworld held its breath. Everyone wanted to know who'd take the throne. But Gambino, ever the chess master, had already decided. Skipping over his own son, he chose Paul Castellano, his cousin and a businessman more than a gangster. Many in the street crews were furious, especially the ones who respected Neil Della Croce. Paul's rise created a quiet storm. He ran things from his Staten Island mansion, far removed from the street. He wore suits, talked numbers, and looked more like a CEO than a boss. Gotti and others called him the Pope, not always with respect. And Neil, though loyal to Gambino's decision, struggled to hold back the growing tension in the ranks. Carlo Gambino passed away in October 1976, at the age of 74, peacefully in his home. No bullets, no betrayal, just quiet power to the very end. His funeral drew thousands, but his legacy was already sealed. He had ruled longer, more quietly, and more effectively than any Don before him. But his death didn't bring peace. It brought the beginning of the storm. With Castellano at the top and Gotti growing restless below, the Gambino family began to split into factions. The old-school loyalty was fading. The streets were rumbling. And as Castellano tightened his grip on white-collar crime, he pushed the street guys further out. That included Gotti. What followed would become one of the most infamous mob betrayals in history. But this story isn't about Gotti, not yet. It's about the man who shaped the game. Carlo Gambino built an empire without leaving fingerprints. He didn't need chaos to rule, just silence, strategy, and the right men around him. In a world of violence, he proved that real power whispers. And when it whispers, everyone listens. After Gambino's death, Paul Castellano tried to reshape the family into a corporate machine. But Carlo's magic was gone. Castellano lacked the respect of the streets. The soldiers, the real muscle, whispered that he was too soft, too distant. The younger crew didn't see a boss. They saw a businessman pretending to be one. Shameful Della Croce did his best to keep the peace. He reminded everyone, this was Gambino's choice. We honor it. But even Neil knew the fire was spreading. Castellano began excluding key captains from meetings, including Gotti's mentor, Angelo Ruggiero. That was a mistake. In the mob, exclusion breeds rebellion. In private conversations, Gotti's crew started calling Castellano Big Paulie with sarcasm. They mocked his mansion, his suits, his obsession with keeping things clean. Gotti believed real bosses walked the streets, not boardrooms. The old values of loyalty and fear were fading. And so, a new plan was born in the shadows. Meanwhile, the FBI wasn't sleeping. They had bugged Castellano's home and caught conversations that would later shake the mob world. Paul talked too much about drugs, murders, even his own men. When Della Croce passed away in 1985, Gotti saw the perfect moment. The last barrier of respect was gone. Ambiguity 16th, 1985, Paul Castellano was gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The hit was clean, fast, and brutal. Gotti watched from a nearby car as Castellano's reign ended in a flash. The Gambino family and the world had just witnessed a new era begin. Gambino's silent empire had become Gotti's headline circus. But even in Gotti's time, Carlo Gambino's name was never forgotten. Wise guys still whispered it with respect. He never wore flashy rings or silk shirts, never posed for cameras. He didn't have to. His power lived in silence, in the systems he built, in the loyalty he commanded. Carlo Gambino remains a blueprint. For some, he was a criminal mastermind. For others, a cold and calculating puppet master. But no one denies this. He ruled like a ghost. No prison, no assassination. Just strategy, patience, and fear. The quiet dawn of New York, until the very end. Carlo Gambino didn't just build an empire, he built a system. Every move was calculated. He placed family before flash, loyalty before noise. While others bragged, Gambino strategized. While others felt agreed, he focused on endurance. That's why his reign lasted longer than most bosses could dream of. East between warring factions, manipulated unions, and controlled vast income streams, all without raising his voice. His genius was subtle. A glance, a quiet word, a shift in tone. That was enough to command a room. People feared him because they couldn't read him. The FBI called him the most powerful man in organized crime, but they could never pin him down. Gambino rarely used phones. He didn't rant, didn't drink, didn't draw attention. While other mobsters were hunted in flashy Cadillacs, he walked calmly under the radar, invisible, untouchable. Even as law enforcement grew more sophisticated, Gambino stayed one step ahead. He shifted meetings constantly, avoided wiretaps, and communicated through trusted soldiers. The Don understood the importance of control, not just of territory but of information. And information was power. When asked how he avoided prison for so long, one agent simply said, "He didn't talk," and no one dared talk about him. That's the aura he built, not just leadership, but fear so deep, silence was the only language spoken in his presence. His most powerful trait? Patience. Gambino waited years before making a move. He'd rather delay than risk exposure. He once waited over a decade to retaliate against a betrayal, and when he did, the punishment was swift, silent, and final. That was his style. Despite the pressure, Gambino never cracked. Even when his closest associates were indicted or flipped, he stayed composed. He had a habit of stepping away just before things exploded, as if he sensed the danger before it was visible. That's not luck. That's instinct. To this day, old-school wise guys speak of Gambino in hushed tones, not just as a boss, but as a blueprint. Every quiet mover, every calculated player, every modern-day ghost in the underworld, they're all walking in his shadow. Carlo Gambino wasn't just the quiet Don, he was the standard. In the 1950s, as the American underworld evolved, Gambino made a quiet but pivotal move, forming an alliance with Meyer Lansky, the Jewish mob financier. Their relationship wasn't based on friendship, but on money and stability. Lansky brought the casinos, Gambino brought the streets. Together, they were unstoppable. One man who feared Gambino's rise was Albert "Chin" Gigante. Though decades younger, Gigante saw that the old Don's reach was unmatched. Gambino could have him silenced, yet he chose diplomacy. He saw more value in Gigante's potential than his elimination. It was strategy over ego always. Behind the scenes, it was Aniello Della Croce who enforced Gambino's wishes. Della Croce, a ruthless yet loyal capo, was feared in the streets but worshipped within the family. He didn't speak unless ordered. When he did, blood followed. He was Gambino's sword, sharp, clean, and final. Not all enemies came from outside. Within the Gambino family, Paul Castellano began rising too fast for some. Though a relative of Carlo's, many believed he lacked the street toughness the family respected. Gambino, however, saw in Castellano a businessman who could legitimize the empire. In 1972, Gambino's influence reached Capitol Hill. A Senate investigation was quietly derailed after a key witness disappeared from his safe house. No one could prove Gambino ordered it, but everyone knew. When the Don wanted silence, the world obeyed. Gambino never touched drugs, but he let others profit if they did it quietly. When a heroin bust in Queens exposed links to the family, Gambino reacted with fury. 3 soldiers were found dead within a week. No trials, no warnings. He hated loose ends. Even his enemies respected him. Joe Colombo once said, "Gambino's power isn't loud. It's the silence after he speaks." He wasn't feared for what he did, but for what people thought he might do. The paranoia he created was more powerful than any gun. In 1976, as the country celebrated its bicentennial, Gambino's health declined. Rumors spread. Some thought he would retire. Others thought he'd name Della Croce as successor. But Carlo, ever calculated, had one more move left. A succession plan that would shock the entire mafia world. The decision shocked many. Gambino bypassed Della Croce, his loyal underboss, and named Paul Castellano as boss. It wasn't personal, it was strategic. Carlo saw the future of the mafia in unions, construction, and white-collar crime. Castellano was built for that world. Della Croce was furious, but obedient. He accepted the decision with a clenched jaw. To avoid civil war, Gambino gave him control of all street operations, while Castellano ran the business end. Two kings, one throne. But peace that fragile never lasts. Castellano's reign began with unease. Soldiers loyal to Della Croce felt betrayed. Street guys like John Gotti whispered that Castellano never earned it the hard way. Gambino had created a split empire, and even in death, his shadow ruled over it. In the final days of his life, Gambino rarely left his Staten Island home. He spent mornings in his garden, afternoons reading papers brought by hand, not mailed. Even at 74, he never trusted phones, never signed a document, and never left a trail. One of his final meetings was with Carmine Persico of the Colombo family. The two spoke privately for hours. What they discussed was never known. But a week later, a truce between the Colombos and the Genovese family was declared. Gambino's influence hadn't faded, it had deepened. When the end came, it was peaceful. No gunfire, no FBI raid. Carlo Gambino died of a heart attack in his home on October 15, 1976. His funeral was private, closed casket, no lavish display. Even in death, he chose discretion. The FBI had tracked him for decades. Hundreds of hours of surveillance, wiretaps, and operations yielded almost nothing. One agent said, Gambino wasn't invisible. He was just smarter than all of us. They watched, but they never caught him. He left behind more than a criminal empire. He left a blueprint. Modern mob bosses still study his methods. No violence without purpose, no attention, no mistakes. Carlo Gambino didn't rule New York because he wanted power. He ruled because no one else could. This was episode 5, Carlo Gambino, the quiet Don who ruled New York. He didn't die in a hail of bullets or a courtroom bench. He died with secrets intact, enemies outlived, and an empire still standing. That's not just power, that's legacy. If you made it this far, like, subscribe, and share the code. Next up, another chapter, another king, another rulebook. Until then, stay smart, stay sharp, stay dangerous.